Now I got to go talk to him. So with that, let us move from the political commentary about this budget to the decidedly nonpartisan.
Sober second thought.
Did you just get appointed to the Senate? That's what they call the sober second thought. This is Peter Weltman. He is the Financial Accountability Officer for the province of Ontario, decidedly nonpartisan in his view of things, and is holding a copy of the budget. And he's going to join us now and give us his sense on the numbers. Okay, I'm just tempted to kind of tee you up for, what are you holding a copy of the budget there for?
This is the budget.
It is.
It's got a great cover. And the colors are terrific because the colors are FAO blue. And I think it's appropriate because I noticed in the government's forecast that the government's fiscal forecast is now finally converged on what we've been saying for the last year. So I feel pretty good about that.
The Treasurer has spent a lot of time disagreeing with you in public over the last year or two. So you think the fact that the cover of the budget is blue, you see him coming more to seeing things your way? Am I inferring too much?
I think it's a psychological inference maybe that they picked up on that. So.
Okay. We talked to you a couple of weeks ago on the On Poly podcast that I do with John Michael McGrath, and we went through 5 areas in healthcare that you and the FAO studied in depth to find out what the promises were and what the funding was, and you identified a $21.3, I think, billion gap between what they were promising and what they were funding. And then at the last moment I asked you, so what? And you said, well, the budget's coming out in a couple of weeks. Let's see if they help. Okay, the budget's out. How did they do?
Well, there's a whole bunch of new money in the budget, a whole bunch of new spending money, and it appears that they're really on track to what I would say right size the spending plan to line up with the promises that they've said that they want to do, the policies that they want to implement.
They talked, I think you talked about 7,500 new hospital beds, 4,500 of which would have to be built new, 2,500 repurposed. They had 3,000, funding for 3,000 in there. Not 4,500, 3,000. Did they get an F from you because of that?
Well, it's not up to me, right? So that's the fun part about this job. All we do is we point out and say, okay, if we look at the population of 65-year-olds, because those are the ones who occupy more than half of the hospital beds. That's just the way it is. And that population is growing over time. They're going to need more hospital beds out there to accommodate that population. If we're looking at 5 years, that's where we come up with our 4,500 number, 7,500 actually in total. The government had a plan in place to put 7,000 new beds in the 3,000 they promised, probably another 1,000 that they want to repurpose, and then 2,500 they want to free up by moving people to alternate levels of care. And we've said, at that time, remember, our report was a snapshot in time, and this budget is a new snapshot in a new time where we've seen more money put into these programs to fund the policies that they've articulated.
But he didn't hit the numbers that you said needed to be hit. What do we infer from that?
That so 2 things. Either there's more work to do if they want to deliver the service in the same way, if they want to provide enough hospital beds for the 65 and over population and for the whole population of Ontario on the same basis that we've done in 2019, which wasn't great, by the way. We still have lots of hallway health care. However, if that's what they're trying to achieve, they're going to need to do a little bit more. If they have a different way of delivering health care or they're trying some new things where they don't need to add those hospital beds, then, terrific. Let's see what it looks like.
Let's do more examples. You said that they are here funding long-term care beds, and they need to be here. Now, you've seen what they've put in the budget today. How much closer to the number they need to be at are they?
So on a gross basis, overall, it looks like as I said, they've done a pretty good job of right-sizing. We won't actually know the detail sector by sector until we go and do our own analysis and publish our report in the spring, in May. But I think to reiterate on that 30,000 bed commitment, so that would basically try to maintain the same wait list, the same number of beds per population as we saw in 2019. It won't reduce wait times. In fact, it won't quite get to the 2019 level. So if that's what they're trying to do, and they've added new funding, and we'll figure that out by the time we get our report out, then kudos.
I'm going to go through all 5 categories with you here, because you talked the other day about nurses. We need this many nurses, we have this many nurses, and they're not funding this many nurses. And PSWs, personal support workers as well. Okay, what'd you see in the budget today, and is it enough to go from here to here?
Well, again, I'll be able to answer that question specifically once we have a good look at the sector and the detail in the spending plans that will be published shortly. But again, on a basis, they've added $27 billion in new spending over the next 3 years for all programs, not just healthcare. And they still maintain a fairly sizable contingency fund and a sizable reserve. So it appears that there is enough money in the fiscal framework to start to address some of the shortfalls that we identified.
They did identify in the budget today money to deal with the surgical backlog. Enough to deal with all of it? Some of it? A tiny part of it? What?
Well, that's an interesting question because they did allocate a bunch of money to surgical backlogs. A lot of it didn't get spent. I don't exactly know why that was. So adding more money to the pile, presumably if it gets spent and addresses the surgical backlog, that would be a good thing. But it's also important, from an accountability point of view, it's fine to say we're allocating the money, but it's also important to figure out at the end of the year, kind of either through our expenditure monitors over the course of the year or through the public accounts that is audited by the Auditor General at the end of the year, did that money actually get spent? And did it make an impact on surgical wait times?
You also, in your report, identified, I think you called them long waiters. These are people who had to wait. They're not only part of the backlog, but they've had to wait longer than is recommended by medical professionals to have their surgeries done. Do you think this budget helped those people at all today?
So again, we'll have to wait for the details. Clearly, if there's more money being put into something that the government perceives to be a problem, the problem is still there. The surgical wait times are still a problem. The long waiters, we figured so far based on their success in getting that wait time list down, they're not going to make any difference on the wait times. Hopefully, we'll start to see some improvement in that area.
Okay, so that's healthcare.
Yes.
Let's take a look at the rest of the budget. Anything, as you read it, as you flipped through it, anything glaring jump out at you where you said,
Revenue. Unbelievable. Off the charts, crazy revenue numbers. Way, way higher than we've seen in that I remember. We're in a situation where we've had strong economic growth. Our labor report that we released earlier this week showed that we've had the strongest employment growth in Ontario 2 years in a row, the strongest 2-year growth we've ever had before. Record unemployment rate, 5.1%. Big job vacancy.
record low, you mean?
Record low, that's right, record low. So the economy is really strong, and we've had inflation. So inflation on top of that, unusually high inflation, and all that does is it just adds a whole bunch of cash to the government coffers.
Okay, you know how much you don't like to answer political questions. You know how much I like to put them to you.
Absolutely.
So let's try this. Are they entitled to take credit for those buoyant revenues?
So, they can do whatever they want. They're the government, right? So that's the advantage of being in government when times are good, is you get to take credit. I think at the same time, they were in government when the pandemic hit, so they got their fair share of grief as well. And that's just the nature of being, to some degree in the right place at the right time. To some degree, there might be some policy action that may have helped that. Very tough to draw the line between the two, but I can tell you, we haven't, we've record high inflation the last 40 years. We haven't seen this. We've had incredibly strong economic growth, and that in and of itself contributes a ton of money to revenues.
Should we be comforted by the fact that they have forecast inflation to come back to about 2%, where it was for 30 years after all, in just a couple of years' time?
Well, that's a forecast, and we're not too far off of that. So I would have to say, to defend our crystal ball against their crystal ball, the crystal balls are converging a little bit. But we have seen inflation come down. We've seen prices come down in commodity prices, gasoline. A lot of stuff has come down, but people don't see that because most of the time they're thinking about food and they're thinking about their mortgage. And those are two huge issues that haven't. They've gone up and they're still high.
Since you mentioned crystal ball, he did take a bit of a shot at you in the interview. I'm talking about Peter Bethlenfalvy, the other Peter. He took a bit of a shot at you in the interview that he did with me, saying, I know the FAO's got his crystal ball. And he seemed to be, unless I was inferring something that wasn't there, and I don't think I am, he seemed to be suggesting that you're no better able to divine the future than he is. What do you think?
Well, I thought, the context of the question was in the healthcare report, of our healthcare report. So our healthcare report isn't about crystal ball gazing. Our healthcare report is about math. right? How many beds? How much does it cost? How many are we going to need? What is inflation? What is the rate of demographic change? Do the math, project out. There's your number. Government says they want to build 4,000. That's what they cost. Government has allocated X dollars. Oh, it's not enough money. There's no crystal ball gazing there. It's math, and it's also about the government's planned spending versus what they need to spend to hit their objectives.
Just out of curiosity, do you have the kind of relationship with the other Peter whereby after you leave the studio tonight, you could call him up and say, about that crystal ball shot you took at me? Just curious.
Oh, well, sure. I mean, I won't because, I mean, he's been through 23 interviews so far, and this is only my only one. So he's going to be a little tired out. But in due course, if we want to chat about it, we can chat about it. But we do have a good relationship. I do with many ministries in terms of if I think we're going to come out with something that might be a little bit confrontational or might, our job is, as I say, is to shed light, not heat. So if I think there's something that's going to shed heat, I'll put something out and say, listen, there might be something there you guys are going to, have to figure out on how you're going to manage it. But this is the way it is. I'm the referee. I call him as I see him, and that's the way it goes.
You're a numbers guy. So when you look at the budget and you see that the budget is going to be balanced, that's what they forecast, 3 years earlier than anticipated, how do you react?
3 years earlier than they anticipated.
Yeah.
We called for an almost balanced budget this year. Right. So like I said, their numbers are starting to converge on our numbers. So we're certainly we were there a long time ago. What I find interesting is the size of the surplus going forward.
4.4 billion 2 years out.
That's 4.4 after taking into account a $4 billion reserve, right? So that reserve isn't actually money that's appropriated. That's a planning figure so the government can get everybody focused on the 4.4, and that's what they're shooting for. But if you add that $4 billion back to that 4.4...
This is the money that was in the contingency fund we talked about.
This is the planning reserve. We'll talk about contingency.
All right. Okay.
Two different things. So the reserve is a planning figure, and what that does is it gives them some flex in case they need to go back and ask for more money. But if you add that, when we don't take that into account in our forecast, so if we're looking at that, we're looking at an $8.4 billion potential surplus in 3 years from now, not 4.4. If everything goes, according to forecasts, which of course they don't always do, right? So it's significant.
That's
a lot
money.
more than we're actually forecasting. We're forecasting 5.3.
Tell me something. On a budget that spends $200 billion, and you've got a deficit of about $2 billion, I mean, that's a rounding error on that kind of a budget, isn't it?
Yeah.
So why bother? Why not just balance this year?
Well, that's a good question, for the government. It's not our budget. We just do the analysis, but it's effectively zero. I mean, that's how we look at it. It's a rounding error. And there may be reasons they may still balance this year. There may be expenditures that they thought they'd have to make that they don't have to make. There may be increased revenues coming in, even though, they forecast a higher revenue. But remember, their snapshot in time was around, end of February-ish when they put pens down and they had to print this document with the nice FAO blue color on it. So at that point, that's locked in. We will have the advantage of having a little bit more up-to-date forecast when we come in, and up-to-date economic numbers when we come out with our report in May.
This snapshot in timeline is something that I hear him say it about you all the time.
That's right.
That you're just looking at numbers at a snapshot in time, and therefore we ought not to pay too much attention to it. Are you using that expression back at him now? Because
is it that obvious?
I don't know if it's obvious, but it's more than a coincidence. I think that you've said it 3 times so far.
It's true. Both of our work are snapshots in time. I mean, and things change, right? They do their budget. We'll do our economic and budget outlook in May. So we have the advantage of having slightly more up-to-date figures, and they'll come out with a fall economic statement, they meaning the government, and they'll have more up-to-date economic numbers than we would have had. So it's a rolling thing, and and it's great for taxpayers, citizens, because 4 times a year they get to see how things are progressing and how the forecasts change.
Right. Now, one thing the Treasurer did say today is that the deficit number for last year was, a minute to go? We got a minute left. Was way better than they anticipated. So everybody's powers of prognostication are not necessarily the best when there's a war in Ukraine and inflation's doing what it's doing. And so how much of today's budget, how much of that document do you think we can take to the bank over the next 3 years?
Well, it's tricky. It's tricky. We'll know better once we have a good chance to look at it. As I said, their numbers are getting a little bit closer to ours, but there's some pretty high revenue forecasts in there that I'm going to take a second look at. I'm thinking they're looking a little high, but you know, we do have all these other uncertainties: a war in Ukraine, we have inflation, and all those will have an impact down the road. They'll make us both wrong. So.
Gotcha. Thanks for coming in tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
This is a real pleasure.
Tonight.
Yeah, we've talked lots
fun.
in the past, but this is the first time live at 8:59 p.m. here in the province of Ontario. So thanks a lot. That's Peter Weltman, the Financial Accountability Officer for the province of Ontario.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.